The war had been over for 7 solar cycles, yet the battlefield still whispered with the ghosts of hatred and shattered alliances. Across the charred plains of Varix 9, the ash fell like gray snow, bearing bones, burnt metal, and forgotten pride. The sky, a dark wash of violet and rust-red clouds, stretched endlessly overhead, torn by the distant flashes of decaying starship wrecks trapped in low orbit. Amid the ruins and the skeletal remains of what had once been a palace of crystalline spires stood the alien queen, tall, ethereal, motionless. Her name was spoken in hushed tones across both species: Vy'ressa, Empress of the Zorathi Dominion, a monarch known for her icy composure, her ruthlessness, and the unshakable belief that humans were a dangerous anomaly in the galaxy. They called her cold because no emotion ever flickered across her angular, translucent face. Her luminous eyes of deep blue never wavered, her silver skin never betrayed even the flicker of pain. But here she stood, her lone, regal figure dwarfed by the broken arches and fallen banners, as if guarding a tomb forgotten by time. Vy'ressa's clawed fingers pressed lightly against her temple, the faint pulse of a neural communicator fizzing static into her mind, though no one answered her calls anymore. Her people were gone, their war fleets obliterated, their colonies glassed or abandoned. And the humans, those maddeningly fragile yet relentlessly enduring creatures, had vanished from this sector after their uneasy victory. She should have been relieved, free to retreat into exile with what little remained of her empire. But instead, a strange silence gnawed at her, louder than the hum of empty wind. Then, from beneath the fractured floor, a weak, ragged sound cut through the haze. A cough, rough with blood, human lungs gasping through the suffocating dust. Her muscles tensed, battle instincts prickling along her spine. Yet the sound was unmistakable. A human was here, breathing, suffering. How? They were supposed to have evacuated weeks ago. Her sharp, crystalline eyes narrowed, tracking the origin of the noise, and she moved with predatory grace toward the rubble-strewn chamber below. Shards of alien glass crunching underfoot. There, barely visible beneath a collapsed beam and shredded composite panels, was the impossible, a lone human soldier, his body broken, armor scorched, face pale beneath the grime of battle. Blood trickled from his mouth, pooling beneath him like ink in the dust. His eyes, unfocused but burning with that maddening human defiance, met hers for only a heartbeat. She could end him. She should end him. Yet she stood still, frozen by something colder than duty. Curiosity, perhaps. Or the quiet realization that this human, despite the agony etched into every trembling breath, had not raised his weapon. He had not begged. He simply existed there, bleeding, fragile, yet stubbornly alive, a spark of raw defiance against oblivion itself. And for the first time in Vy'ressa's long, bitter reign, she hesitated. The war had taught her humans were dangerous, unpredictable, driven by emotion as much as logic. But nothing in the archives, no analysis or counsel, had prepared her for this, a dying human soldier beneath her feet, staring at her as if she were not his enemy, but something else entirely. Something he still believed could choose mercy. The cold inside her cracked, just slightly, like ice beneath the first rays of an unfamiliar sun. Asterisk, the human coughed again. The sharp sound cutting through the stillness, flecks of red staining his lips as he fought to breathe beneath the crushing weight of debris. Vy'ressa's eyes narrowed, watching him struggle like a fragile creature on the edge of death, and yet his gaze never faltered. Despite the trembling in his limbs, despite the pain etched deep into the lines of his dirt-streaked face, there was a spark behind those battered, mortal eyes, not hatred, not fear, something far more dangerous. Defiance wrapped in compassion. Strength veiled beneath vulnerability. He shifted weakly, trying to free himself, and a low groan escaped his throat. Vy'ressa should have walked away. Logic dictated she let him perish. One less human to haunt the Dominion's shadowed history. But the ancient instinct that made her a ruler, the relentless need to understand, to dominate, to unravel mysteries, rooted her in place. The human's voice was cracked, weak, but unmistakably laced with something raw when he finally spoke. "You gonna help me?" he rasped, forcing the words past torn lips. "Or just stand there?" His accent was rough, Terran standard with that irritating inflection of stubbornness they all carried. But beneath the weakness was something stronger, an unwavering thread of will. He didn't beg for mercy, he demanded purpose from her presence. It was absurd, bleeding, broken, his fragile body moments from collapse, yet he dared to question a queen of the stars as if they were equals trapped in the same dying ruin. Vy'ressa's crystalline eyes darkened, her sharp jaw tightening, but she did not strike him down. Instead, her fingers moved, long talon-tipped, unnaturally graceful, pushing aside rubble with an ease that belied her slender frame. Human watched, confusion flickering across his bruised features as she crouched beside him, silver skin catching faint light through the cracked dome above. His breathing quickened, more from shock than fear now, as her hands brushed the debris away, revealing the charred remains of his armor, a standard-issue Terran combat rig, scorched by plasma fire, torn by shrapnel. His dog tags clung to. His chest, partially melted, but still bearing his name, Aiden Voss. Her mind catalogued the information instinctively, old habits from years of espionage and war. But as her gaze met his again, the analytical edge softened, replaced by something ancient and buried deep beneath layers of royal detachment, curiosity laced with reluctant respect. Why? Aiden managed, wincing as she shifted the broken beam, crushing his leg. His question hung in the air, unfinished, but she understood its weight. Why help him? Why spare him? Why betray the image of the cold, merciless alien queen whispered about in every Terran war story? Vy'ressa didn't answer immediately. Instead, her hand hovered over the crude wound in his side, the burnt flesh, the sluggish bleeding. Zorathi medical instincts kicked in, precise and ancient, and from her wrist, a compartment opened, revealing a thin, luminescent device, a field stimulator used for soldiers of her kind, adaptable but never before tested on humans. It hummed. Softly, light pulsing like a second heartbeat. She hesitated only a moment before activating it, pressing it gently against the worst of his injuries. Aiden's eyes widened as cool energy pulsed through him, numbing pain, knitting torn tissue, and crude, temporary repairs. His breathing eased fractionally, but disbelief painted his expression more vividly than the blood still staining his chin. "Thought you hated us," he whispered, voice cracking as he searched her face for answers. Vy'ressa tilted her head slightly, silver strands of her hair catching the dim light, and for the first time in cycles, she allowed a flicker of vulnerability to breach her flawless facade. "Perhaps," she murmured, her voice low and sharp, alien yet edged with strange warmth. "I believe the same." But the battlefield was quiet now. The war was over. All that remained was a broken soldier, a fractured queen, and the heavy silence of things left unsaid. The human had asked for help, not demanded surrender, not offered threats, simply reached out with the raw, stubborn resilience that defined his species. And against every cold, calculated instinct of her royal blood, Vy'ressa found herself responding. Not with hatred, not with violence, but with something far older, a choice. And in that moment, the divide between human and alien began to crack, like old stone under relentless human rain. The wind whispered through the shattered ruins, carrying with it the faint scent of scorched metal and old blood. Around them, the skeleton of the once magnificent crystalline palace stood in broken silence, jagged spires reaching toward the bruised sky like the bones of a forgotten god. Vy'ressa had seen such devastation before cities turned to ash, monuments reduced to rubble, but there was something different here, something heavier pressing against the edges of her thoughts as she knelt beside the human, as the stimulators glow faded and his shallow breathing steadied, if only slightly. Aiden Voss lay still now, the grimace of pain etched deep in his dirt-streaked face. But his eyes never left hers, searching, questioning, refusing to surrender even as his body threatened to betray him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The space between them felt fragile, like glass stretched to its limit, one wrong word away from shattering. But it was Aiden who finally broke the silence, his voice weak, but carrying that maddening Terran humor that made them so infuriatingly dangerous in battle and yet so achingly human. "Guess you're not as cold as they say," he whispered, the corners of his lips twitching into the ghost of a smirk, despite the pain lancing through his ribs. His words should have offended her, should have reignited the icy barrier of royal pride that had shielded her for decades, but instead a strange, foreign warmth stirred beneath her stern composure. Vy'ressa regarded him carefully, noting the blood matted in his dark hair, the tremor in his battered frame, and still, that insufferable spark of stubborn humanity burned bright. "You mistake practicality for mercy," she replied coolly, though her hands betrayed her, adjusting his posture with a carefulness that belied her tone. His wince deepened as she shifted him upright, but he didn't resist, leaning slightly against the support of her arm. Up close, the stark differences between them were undeniable, his skin marked with bruises and old scars, pulse racing beneath fragile veins, while her own body shimmered with the subtle glow of bioengineered resilience, her silver complexion unmarred by weakness. Yet despite the divide, something unspoken bridged the chasm. The minutes passed, heavy and quiet as Vy'ressa patched what wounds she could with alien precision, and Aiden watched her with a gaze no longer clouded by suspicion but by curiosity. And something deeper. "Why are you still here?" he asked softly, voice rough from dehydration and injury. "Your people lost my squad's Goneo could have left." His words trailed off, heavy with grief, and Vy'ressa faltered, the sting of uncomfortable memory scraping along the walls of her mind. She thought of her people, millions of them reduced to shadows and dust, their proud ships silenced by Terran fire, their legacy buried beneath the endless stars. She should have hated him, hated all of them, but in the hollow ruins of her empire, hate felt empty. "I remained," she admitted quietly, because loss does not fade with distance. Her voice was steady, but beneath it lurked fractures of sorrow long hidden beneath duty and rank. Aiden's expression softened, the bravado dimming just enough for his raw humanity to bleed through. He understood. The pain of survival, the bitter ache of being the last when all others had fallen. It was a universal agony, shared across species, carved into every corner of his weary face. "Same," he whispered, his hand trembling slightly as he gestured. "Weakly to the ruins. My squad, they didn't make it. A Vex ship never came." His jaw clenched as his eyes flicked toward the broken sky above. Grief and defiance warring in his battered frame. Vy'ressa's gaze lingered on him, her sharp features unreadable, but her mind churned with quiet revelations. Despite the endless propaganda, despite the wars and bloodshed, the humans bled like her people, mourned like them, clung to life with the same ferocity. The realization unsettled her, yet it also chipped away at the cold, impassive mask she'd worn for so long. Carefully, she rested her hand against his shoulder, her alien touch. Unfamiliar yet grounding, a silent offering across the chasm of war. Aiden's eyes widened fractionally, but he did not flinch. Instead, he closed them briefly, exhaling as though, for the first time in days, the weight pressing on his chest lightened just enough to breathe dot in the ruins of a forgotten war. Beneath, a fractured alien sky, an impossible bond began to form, not born of politics or species, but of shared loss, relentless endurance, and the quiet, stubborn spark of hope neither of them could yet name. The twilight deepened over Vy'ressa 9, casting the skeletal remains of the palace in shadows that stretched like ancient wounds across the ground. The stars above, once bright with promise, flickered dimly beneath the thick clouds of ash and orbital debris. Vy'ressa stood silently beside the human, watching the dying light bleed into darkness as Aiden's breathing steadied, though the weakness in his limbs still chained him to the broken floor. For a time, they shared the quiet, bound by fragile understanding, until the distant hum of engines shattered the fragile peace dot. It was faint at first, a low, ominous vibration threading through the bones of the ruined structure, but Vy'ressa's senses sharpened instantly, her crystalline eyes narrowing. The humans had not returned to rescue their lost soldier. That sound carried a different signature. Aiden sensed it too, wincing as he tried to sit up, panic lacing his voice despite the exhaustion pulling at him. "It's not ours," he rasped, blood crusting at the corner of his mouth as he strained to listen. Vy'ressa nodded, already scanning the broken walls for vantage points. Her neural interface flared with faint data streams, encrypted frequencies, unfamiliar signal patterns, and the unmistakable truth carved itself into her mind like ice. "Come for the dead," she murmured, her voice colder than it had been minutes before, edged with an old bitterness. Aiden's brows furrowed, confusion overtaking the pain in his expression. "What?" he croaked, forcing himself upright with grim determination. Vy'ressa's gaze hardened as she spoke the words she'd long buried in classified archives and whispered legends. "Scavengers," she revealed, her voice sharp with quiet fury. "Not of your kind nor mine. Parasites who feast on fallen worlds." The realization dawned on Aiden with slow horror as the engine hum grew louder, closer, and ugly, guttural sound vibrating through the ruins like the rumble of predators circling wounded prey. Vy'ressa's silver fingers hovered near, a concealed weapon at her hip, but her stance remained composed, despite the tension coiled within her. "When our war ended, this world became ripe," she continued, the disdain in her tone palpable. "They harvest remnants. Technology, organs, biomass. They strip away what the victors leave behind." Her eyes burned with quiet rage as the implication settled over them like a shroud. Aiden's battered form stiffened, the haze of injury briefly overridden by instinctual dread. "You mean they're coming for me?" he asked, voice hoarse but laced with the stubborn defiance she was beginning to recognize as uniquely human. Vy'ressa didn't answer immediately. Her silence was answer enough. The scavenger ships, small, fast, designed to slip between the ruins of lost civilizations, were almost upon them. Even from this distance, she could sense the low-grade weaponry and biological scanners primed for easy prey. Injured soldiers, corpses, abandoned tech, it didn't matter. To them, Aiden was just salvage, another forgotten fragment of a war. They never fought. Her own status, however, complicated matters. The scavengers likely knew of her, rumors of the last Zorathi queen drifting through lawless space, but it wouldn't shield her. It would only raise her value as a prize. Aiden's jaw clenched, and despite the agony in his body, his eyes burned. With resolve. "Leave me," he said suddenly, surprising them both with the rawness of the command. You can still get out. I'll slow them down." His words cracked at the edges, but his meaning was clear. Even crippled and barely breathing, he offered himself as bait, as distraction, so she might escape. Vy'ressa's chest tightened unexpectedly, an unfamiliar pang resonating beneath the carefully constructed armor of her heart. The notion was so infuriatingly human, this absurd, reckless willingness to sacrifice for another. Even an alien once considered an enemy, but Vy'ressa was done underestimating humans. Their strength wasn't in brute force or superior technology. It was in their maddening, unwavering capacity to give, even when logic dictated they retreat. For a fleeting moment, her cold facade faltered, and raw frustration mixed with reluctant admiration. "Foolish," she whispered, stepping toward him as the scavenger ship's shadow loomed above the broken spires, its hull bristling with grotesque mechanical limbs, scanning the ruins like a vulture over a corpse. Yet consistent. Her hand gripped Aiden's shoulder, steadying him as her other fingers activated a hidden beacon beneath her armor, an ancient Zorathi signal. Dangerous, forbidden, but perhaps their only chance. The truth was clear now. The war hadn't just ended with declarations or shattered fleets. The aftermath birthed new predators, feeding on the vulnerable left behind. And for the first time in her reign, Vy'ressa understood that survival demanded more than cold calculation. It demanded solidarity, even with those she once called enemies. As the scavenger engines roared overhead and the dying sky trembled with their descent, Vy'ressa prepared to stand, not as a queen of the fallen Zorathi Dominion, but as an unlikely ally beside a fragile, infuriatingly human soldier whose defiance refused to die. The scavenger ship descended like a rotting predator from the darkened sky, its hull stitched together from the broken bones of 100 conquered worlds' burnt alloys, fractured plates of human and alien warcraft, jagged limbs of forgotten machines fused into one grotesque functional beast. Its engine screamed as it hovered over the ruins, casting a pulsing green glow across the crumbling palace floor. Vy'ressa and Aiden huddled beneath the fractured archway, both their bodies dwarfed by the shadow now crawling across the ground toward them. The scavengers wouldn't wait. They never did. They'd descend with their drones, strip flesh from bone, and render technology into scrap before the corpses even cooled. Aiden's face had paled, his injuries gnawing at him with every breath. But his eyes, those maddeningly human eyes, held that familiar spark of defiance as he fumbled at the sidearm holstered weakly at his thigh. His fingers trembled, coated in dried blood, yet the determination never faltered. "You should still run," he muttered, trying and failing to steady the weapon in his grasp. "Your people need you alive, mine." His voice cracked, pain slicing through the words, but Vy'ressa's hand descended upon his wrist with unexpected gentleness. Stilling the weapon before he could lift it, "There is no running," she interrupted, her voice low and sharp, layered with quiet steel. Her other hand hovered over the ancient Zorathi beacon, now pulsing faintly beneath her armor, its signal already cutting through the static-choked airwaves. It was a dangerous gambit. The distress call broadcast a relic code, one only fragments of her scattered forces might recognize, and with it came risk. Pirates, mercenaries, even scavengers themselves might intercept it, but in the absence of hope, calculated risks became necessary. Aiden's brows furrowed as his bleary gaze met hers, the tension between them thick as ash. What did you do?" he rasped, the flicker of suspicion rising beneath the exhaustion in his voice. Vy'ressa's crystalline eyes darkened as she released his wrist, straightening to her full, commanding height silver skin, catching the sickly green light pouring from the scavenger vessel above. "I gambled," she admitted coolly, "on the faint hope my people are not entirely gone, and on the maddening belief your kind might still surprise me." Her gaze lingered on him a moment longer, the edges of her regal mask fracturing ever so slightly, revealing something raw beneath the icy surface: fear, pride, stubborn faith in impossible odds. The scavenger ship's underside cracked open, mechanical tendrils unfurling with the sick precision of dissecting knives, scanning the ruins for movement. The drones descended next, hovering constructs with sharp, Insect-like limbs and pulsating red optics, their language a series of mechanical clicks and guttural tones. They scuttled across the debris, drawn toward the faint biosignatures Aiden's. Wounded bodies still radiated. One of the drones paused mere meters away, its sensors locking onto the heat signature behind the archway. Aiden's grip tightened weakly on his weapon, but Vy'ressa's hand pressed firmly to his shoulder, grounding him. Not yet, she whispered, the faintest trace of urgency threading through her composed voice. The beacon pulsed again, louder this time, a ripple of ancient code breaking through the air like a siren's wail. For a breathless heartbeat, the scavengers hesitated, their communication lines erupting with static, their patterns faltering as the beacon signal clawed into their systems. Vy'ressa's scamble had reached them. Then, through the haze of ash and debris, the faintest flicker of movement appeared beyond the horizon, a shimmering distortion, almost imperceptible, cresting over the jagged skyline. Another ship. Sleek, angular, not built from scavenged parts, but forged with the clean, predatory design of Zorathi engineering. Her breath hitched, though her expression remained cold as stone. Reinforcements, maybe, or the remnants of her people answering. An old, desperate queen's final call. The scavengers reacted swiftly, their attention divided, their drones glitching momentarily as encrypted pulses flooded the air. It was a crack in their formation, a sliver of opportunity carved by desperation and frail hope. Vy'ressa essays locked with Aiden's once more, and in that unspoken moment the divide between species, war, and history fractured entirely. His. Injuries, her exile, the ruins of empires, all irrelevant compared to the raw, shared determination to endure. We stand together, she declared quietly, not as command but as pact, ancient and binding beneath the dying sky. Aiden's cracked. Lips curled faintly, a ghost of a grin, defiant even through pain. Told you not so cold after all, he muttered, voice frayed but fierce. The stakes had risen beyond survival. It was no longer about escaping scavengers or outliving a battlefield. It was about proving against every shattered alliance and lost friend that resilience didn't belong to one species alone. It belonged to all those who bled, who lost, who dared to hope in the ruins of their own destruction. Asterisk. The scavenger drones screeched as the beacon signal sliced through their systems like a phantom blade, their twisted forms flickering with red static as they recalibrated, sensors frantically searching for the source of disruption. Above, the grotesque scavenger ship shifted, venting steam and lowering its mechanical arms, talons twitching with hungry precision. But Vy'ressa's attention was fixed on the horizon, where the sleek shadow of the approaching Zorathi vessel grew clearer, a dark silhouette cutting through the ashen sky, defying the ghosts of war that hung over the ruins. She couldn't be sure who commanded it, loyal remnants, deserters, or opportunists, but hope, thin and sharp as a blade, coiled. In her chest, Aiden gritted his teeth as he tried to rise, his body screaming in protest. Blood still matted his side, his leg barely responsive, but stubborn defiance etched itself into every trembling muscle. Vy'ressa reached down, her grip strong yet careful, hauling him to his feet with unexpected grace for someone of her alien, statuesque frame. He swayed but stood, the scorched earth beneath, them trembling as the scavenger ship's engines flared in response to the approaching Zorathi vessel. "Looks like your people got the invitation," Aiden rasped, his lips twitching into a crooked, pained grin. Vy'ressa's expression remained unreadable, but the faintest flicker of resolve burned in her crystalline eyes. "We'll see if they come as allies," she replied, releasing him gently as her hand hovered over the weapon holstered at her side. The scavenger drones clicked in mechanical frustration, narrowing their ranks as they advanced, while the scavenger ship unleashed a torrent of garbled transmission, threats, commands, warnings, all tangled in a language bred from conquest and decay. It didn't matter. Vy'ressa had heard it all before, across battlefields littered with the bones of both humans and Zorathi alike. The first drone lunged, its bladed limbs slashing through the dust. Vy'ressa moved like liquid metal, intercepting with a swift arc of her blade, the alien steel singing as it severed the construct's core. Sparks erupted, its body collapsing into twitching fragments. More followed, claws scraping, sensors gleaming like hungry eyes. Aiden raised his sidearm, his hands trembling, but steady enough to fire into the advancing swarm. His shots weren't perfect exhaustion, weighed heavily, but they landed, blasting one drone's optical unit into shards of molten circuitry. Vy'ressa fought beside him, not as a queen towering above mortals, but as an equal, blade slicing. Movements precise, her silver form weaving through the fray. The scavenger ship roared overhead, deploying more drones, their numbers pressing like a tide. Yet, for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, the battle wasn't against each other, it was shoulder to shoulder. Species set aside, war forgotten beneath the shared defiance of survival, the Zorathi ship neared, sleek and predatory, its weapon systems powering as it hovered over the palace ruins. Vy'ressa activated her identification code, ancient symbols flaring across her wrist display. For a heartbeat, uncertainty coiled in her gut. Would they recognize her authority? Or see her as a relic to be discarded? The scavengers sensed the shift, their communication lines fracturing with static as the approaching vessel's signal overwhelmed theirs. They redoubled their assault, drones closing in, talons flashing, determined to claim their prize before. Reinforcements arrived. A drone broke through Aiden's defenses, its bladed limbs slashing toward him, but Vy'ressa intercepted, her arm colliding with the construct's jagged frame. The blade sliced her skin, silver blood welling beneath the gash, but she didn't falter. Her eyes blazed as she drove her blade into the drone's core, dismantling it in a shower of sparks. Aiden stared, wide-eyed, at the blood trailing down her arm. You're bleeding, he muttered, shock cracking through his voice. Vy'ressa's lips curved faintly, a rare, fleeting expression that hovered between amusement and quiet acceptance. Even queens bleed, she answered, voice soft yet fierce, cutting through the chaos like steel. The Zorathi ship unleashed a focused beam of energy, slicing through the scavenger ranks, forcing the grotesque ship above to retreat, its engines screaming in frustration. The scavenger drones faltered, their ranks collapsing under precise fire, their numbers dwindling beneath the combined assault of the approaching Zorathi vessel and Vy'ressa's unwavering blade. Breathless, bloodied, but unbroken, Aiden and Vy'ressa stood amidst the ruins as the scavenger ship withdrew, beaten, its grotesque limbs retracting as it vanished into the poison clouds above. The remaining drones twitched, lifeless on the ground, and the air felt eerily still. Above them, the Zorathi vessel hovered in silent authority, its insignia a fractured royal crest blazing faintly against the dying sky. Vy'ressa exhaled, the tension bleeding from her posture as she turned to Aiden, his battered form barely standing but his eyes alive with raw, stubborn fire. They had stood together not as enemies, not as relics of a shattered war, but as survivors bound by something older than hatred. Trust forged in fire, fragile but undeniable. The storm above Vy'ressa 9 broke open with streaks of violet lightning. The clouds churning like the sky itself mourned what the war had left behind. Below, the ancient palace lay in ruins, its crystal arches shattered, its once proud banners reduced to ash tangled with forgotten memories. But through the wreckage, beneath the pulsing shadow of the hovering Zorathi vessel, stood Vy'ressa and Aiden, bloody, bruised, and impossibly alive. The scavenger ship had fled into the dark, wounded but not destroyed. Vy'ressa knew they would return someday, as they always did, drawn to the broken edges of civilization like vultures to a corpse. But for now, silence reigned. The Zorathi vessel descended carefully, its sleek hull gleaming against the ash-choked twilight, the insignia of her fractured empire barely visible beneath layers of battle scars. As it landed, the ship's bay doors hissed open, and several Zorathi figures emerged, tall, elegant, eyes gleaming with suspicion and awe as they approached their long-lost queen. Vy'ressa stood tall, though the wound on her arm still pulsed. Faintly, silver blood trickling down her skin like molten moonlight. Her expression remained cold, calculated, but beneath it, a quiet storm brewed. Her people had answered her call, what remained of them, loyalists clinging to the crumbling ideals of a fallen dominion. They expected her to reclaim command, to lead with the same unyielding, strategic brilliance she had always embodied, but something inside her had shifted. Aiden's breath came in ragged, uneven gasps, his body trembling beneath the weight of injury and exhaustion. He leaned against the broken wall, his legs barely supporting him, yet when their eyes met, it wasn't weakness reflected there, it was resolve, human resolve. That maddening, terrifying, beautiful thing that refused to bow to pain or logic. Vy'ressa had seen it ignite wars, drive their species to the brink of extinction, and yet now she saw its other face. Compassion, sacrifice, the impossible willingness to give, even when the cost was one's own life. The Zorathi guards approached cautiously, weapons at the ready, their sharp eyes flicking to the human at her side. One of them spoke in their melodic, clipped language, a question veiled as an order. "Shall we dispose of him, Empress? His kind they are dangerous." Their words lingered in the thick, scorched air, loaded with expectation. Vy'ressa gazed didn't waver from Aiden's. She remembered the moment she had found him, broken beneath rubble, his blood staining the dust, the way he had looked at her not as an enemy, but as something more. The way he had offered himself as a distraction, willing to die so she might live. Even when logic demanded he abandon all hope. And the memory of standing together, blades and guns drawn, fighting side by side as the scavengers descended like wolves. That too burned into her like a brand. No, Vy'ressa said, her voice carrying the quiet weight of finality, cutting through the ash and silence. The guards stiffened, confused, but her next words came like a seismic fracture. Through old beliefs, he is under my protection. He bled for this world for me. She stepped forward, her regal posture unwavering as her silver hand reached for Aiden, steadying him as his knees nearly buckled. His eyes widened in quiet disbelief, a shaky exhale slipping past his cracked lips. Guess you really aren't as cold as they say, he whispered, weak but laced with that maddening Terran defiance, the ability to laugh at the universe even when it threatened to break him. Vy'ressa's expression remained carved from ice, but the corner of her lips twitched, the faintest ghost of something, resembling a smile, brittle, hard-earned, and so rare it could fracture planets. Perhaps, she murmured, her voice low, unfamiliar even to her own ears. Or perhaps I've learned warmth is another form of strength. The ship's engines rumbled, preparing to depart. The scavengers would return, as they always did. The galaxy remained fractured, haunted by war, prejudice, and scars. But something fragile and defiant had ignited here in the ruins, not between nations, but between two souls who should have been enemies, yet found unity in the shared agony of loss and the impossible, infuriating spark of hope. Vy'ressa guided Aiden aboard the ship, her people watching in wary silence. Above them, the stars began to pierce the smog-choked sky, faint pinpricks of light against the endless dark. Empires fell, blood spilled. And yet, humanity, with all its reckless empathy, its impossible resilience, endured. And for the first time in Vy'ressa's long, cold reign, she understood why, because true strength was never just power or conquest, or unyielding logic. It was sacrifice. It was hope. And sometimes it was bleeding beside your enemy only to realize they'd become something far more dangerous, a friend.